Hey everybody, Matt with Freestand here. Got a special guest on the show today, Steve Bisson, right?
Yes,
Awesome.
correct.
It's a French last name. He's from Montreal, and he just got his citizenship today,
Yes,
right?
thank you. Yes,
So congratulations, that's awesome. And you've been here for 21 years, right?
yes, 21 years.
Wow, very cool. Well, anyway, Steve is a therapist. He runs his own private practice, and then he also works on Talkspace, which is the online platform that connects therapists to people seeking therapy. And do you also use BetterHelp ever?
I've never been on BetterHelp, but Teladoc I actually used.
Teladoc, okay. And is Teladoc like a connection platform, or is it more of like a HIPAA compliant Zoom? That
Talkspace is also HIPAA compliant. Teladoc is also HIPAA compliant, but is usually linked to your health insurance.
Okay, got it. But Teladoc is like a marketplace type deal, right? Where you can go on there and find somebody. It's not just like for
Oh no,
some
literally, if you can have it with your, well, say Blue Cross, and in the back it'll say you have Teladoc services, and you go to Teladoc and you can choose your therapist and many other services there. So they
Gotcha.
don't they're not on market. They're just linked to your health insurance typically.
Got it. Okay, very cool. Um, and you also run your own private practice, which is half in person and half virtual, right?
Correct.
Okay, very cool. And prior to the pandemic, what was that dynamic? Was it mostly in person and kind of like partially virtual, or?
I would say 3/4 face to face and a quarter virtual. I've been on the virtual platform for about 6 years now. And it is really a good way for people to get services without having to drive somewhere or if they don't have the time. So you can really be more flexible with that. So even before the pandemic, I was doing this.
Got it. And where are you located, by the way? And I think I asked you before.
My office is in Holliston, Massachusetts, which is about 30 to 40 minutes out of Boston. And I've been in this office since 2012. So it's been a while.
Gotcha. And do you mainly work with clients in the Boston area, or is it people kind of all over?
So the dynamic right now is a little different with the pandemic, but I'll talk to you pre-pandemic because it's going to go back to that eventually. So you can only see people where you're licensed. So I'm only licensed in Massachusetts. So I can only see clients in Massachusetts for that. If I was, for example, licensed in Vermont also, I can be in Massachusetts and see people in Vermont. But if I'm not licensed there, I can't see people from Vermont. So you always
Gotcha.
have to be licensed where you're seeing the client. So in mental health counseling, there's a parity law that's going in, and there's also what they call an interstate law that Georgia, and I can't remember, I want to say Maryland, but I'm not sure, they just signed that, so they're reciprocal. Mental health counseling, unfortunately, is currently not reciprocal from state to state. So is social work, which is the other part that does a lot of therapy. We're working on that. There's a lot of legislation, and I think that it's a matter of time because if someone in Georgia needs help, why shouldn't I be able to help them? But
Yeah.
right now, if I did that, that would be considered illegal.
Yeah. Yeah. It's crazy that they don't allow it to just be. I mean, what's your opinion? Do you think it should definitely be unrestricted, right? As
You know,
long as
6 years ago, I was in the wild, wild west because I was one of the few people who were doing online counseling. So I could see people in North Dakota and Texas and California, but then everyone's like, well, there's liability issues. And for that, I understand. So if something happens to a client, let's say in Arizona, I don't know the resources in Phoenix, Arizona, because I'm up here and I'm not licensed there. So if there's something that happens, there's a huge liability risk. So I get why that occurred. With time, I think that we have a lot of access, more resources. So if I needed the crisis team in Phoenix, I think I could access that very easily, just like I could call someone in Syracuse. I love your hat, by the way.
yeah.
Um,
Thank you.
but like if I went to Syracuse and I'm like, oh crap, oh, what's that phone number? I could probably figure it out. And adding that little licensure thing, it makes sense. I just think that where it doesn't make sense is that if you needed help, for example, and you contacted me and you're desperate and I can help you, I have to go, well, I'm not licensed in New York. I'm sorry. I don't know if you're in New York. I'm just
Yeah,
assuming because of the hat.
I'm in Brooklyn, New York, but
Oh,
I
you're in
went
Brooklyn. All right.
yeah,
So I couldn't help you because you're in Brooklyn. And that I find ridiculous.
yeah,
So I get the spirit of why, of liability and all that. I just think that if you needed help, uh, I should be able to help you and figure out the logistics afterwards. But that's just me.
yeah. No, I mean, I completely agree with you. And the thing is, like you were mentioning beforehand, you know, obviously there's, I'm sure if somebody lives in Georgia, there's a therapist that they could meet up with in Georgia. But if they really like working with you, I mean, that's like the most important thing, right? It's not just about having any therapist; it's about having the right therapist.
It's always, there's two thoughts on there. So for me, it's heartbreaking. I just had a client move to San Diego, had another client who went to live in Maryland, mentioning Maryland, have another client who went down in another part of California, um, a small town up north. And the problem is that I can't follow them. Now, I'm sad about it. They would like the support, but I can't do it. Part of me is like, I really want to follow them and help them. But another part of me, and I think that there was a good discussion on that on the board, is don't we need to know as therapists how to terminate with clients when they go away? So I think that there is also a good value in letting go of people, letting them understand how to let go of people and still have a healthy relationship, even though they don't see them anymore. So I can see the value in both. But between you and me and your audience, I'd rather be seeing my clients in California right now. I have a connection. I feel good with them. They feel good with me. If they're done with their therapy, they're done with their therapy. There's a couple, and again, I don't want to say that they all need it desperately, but they need a little support. I should be able to help them in this transition, and that's where I think we should be able to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I feel like, in a way, obviously it's different, but it's kind of like your therapist is, and maybe you disagree with this, but it's kind of like your friend in a way. I feel like over time you get more comfortable with them, and like that relationship that might go on for 5 years is really important. And just starting from scratch might be, not the best thing for the patient.
I'll save you the expletive, but a client of mine before a long time ago was moving to Michigan. And she said, I didn't want to have to tell someone my crap again. I already told you my crap. You
Yeah,
already know it. So I agree. And the friend thing, it's controversial in our field in some way, but I'll tell you my personal opinion is that I'm a paid friend with boundaries, and if you get that connection with someone and they respect you and they're not asking you about personal stuff, you're not crossing any boundaries. And, if I have to explain boundaries, we are going to have a long conversation here. But the bottom line is that we need to be able to have boundaries, but I call them paid friends. One of my first ever clients a long time ago said to me, you're like my paid friend. I would never ask you to go anywhere, but I listen to, and so I get the
yeah,
analogy. I see it that same way.
yeah, yeah. No, it's interesting. And you said that in terms of the state to state thing, they're working on stopping that, right?
Yes. The American Counseling Association
Mm,
is working on that. So I think they have 6 states, either they're accepted already or there's legislation in place. So the Northeast, for some reason, has decided not to get involved. I don't know why. And when I said the Northeast, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, all of New England, they're
mm-hmm.
not involved with that. I just don't understand why. But hoping that with time we get there. There was recent legislation because telehealth is not guaranteed on your health insurance right now.
Yeah,
So that legislation that was actually put in place, but it's not yet there. But Donald Trump, President Trump had offered that before he went. Joe Biden agreed, reintroduced it to the legislation, and it's still stuck in legislation, which is very frustrating because
yeah,
I think telehealth should be therapy for all. It just gives access to people. I'll share this story if you don't mind.
yeah, absolutely.
When we could cross borders, this is again a long time ago, as I called it, the wild west. I had a client who lived in Idaho who was very isolated, and the few therapists that she knew in the area, she didn't get along or she didn't have a connection. Well, she connected with me. Why shouldn't she be able to connect with me and pay for that? And I understand some of the liability. I understand. I don't want to disagree with
Yeah,
that. but it's sad when you have a connection and you got to go, sorry about that connection, but I'll see you later.
Yeah.
It's not fair to the client, I believe.
Yeah, I agree. And you're saying back in the day, so this is like the beginning of the internet when you could meet with somebody, or maybe you were just calling them
I
on the
call them the
phone.
Wild Wild West because it was telehealth started about, I want to say 10 to 15 years ago when Skype became a thing.
Yeah.
There was no legislation per se at the time.
Hmm.
So unfortunately there might have been issues. That's what I'm assuming happened. So with time, there's restrictions tighten to the point where right now, I live, I work in Holliston. Rhode Island's about 20 minutes from me.
Yeah.
Well, if someone from Rhode Island wants help, I can't help them if they're in Rhode Island. If they
Yeah.
cross the border, then I can help them.
Yeah, it makes no sense. Like they could
It
just
makes no
drive
sense to
over
me.
and see you in person as opposed to just zooming with you. Yeah.
So
And
there's a lot of these logistics. I get some of it, but some of it's just a waste of time, in my opinion.
yeah. And your platform online, so you use Teladoc, you use Talkspace,
Talkspace.
and then you also have your own website where you're able to meet with people? Or do you
Yes,
use, yeah.
yes. So doxy.me is a free online site. So if someone needs that, they're very good. What it is like the bandwidth is pretty big and it's HIPAA compliant. HIPAA compliant includes three things, and don't tell my licensure, I forget some of them. But the one important one is you have to have a business agreement. It's got to be secure. No one can get into it. It's encrypted both sides. I think that's what and it needs to have business
Mhm.
agreement. DocSeMe will give it to you. Psychology Today, if you have a therapist sign in, you can use their platform. Again, it comes with a business agreement. The one I'm currently using is through my electronic health records. That's therapyappointment.com. And what they do is they've come into business with Zoom. So I can use Zoom, HIPAA compliant Zoom that's protected with the HIPAA stuff for an extra $15 a month, which I think is very reasonable. The HIPAA compliance stuff may seem overbearing to some. I like my conversations to be private with my clients. I respect my clients tremendously. Not that my clients are saying absolutely horrific things, and if they did, I'd have to report them. But I think that we need to keep the confidentiality. So at the beginning, I was a little opposed to that. I'm like, why not Skype? Why not FaceTime?
Yeah.
But nowadays, I'm like, no, if there's a confidentiality issue, I mean, I get it. I want people to be protected.
And if your clients do want to FaceTime with you, they can, right? But they have to sign off on it or something like that.
So yes and no. So right now with the pandemic, I can even do it over the phone. We don't need I just needed to write in my notes so the insurance company knows. I can do it through FaceTime, Skype,
So they loosened that up during the pandemic.
but they're tightening it up again.
Got it. Okay.
And some of it, I get it. But again, for me, like I have clients who can't have that bandwidth because where they live, they don't have good Wi-Fi or good internet service. So
Mhm.
FaceTime is a lot easier to get through. I work with individuals who are a little older too. And when you're older, trying to tell them to set up Psychology Today or DocSeMe, it's like, so
So Psychology Today, you can meet with somebody. They have like their own video, like conferencing platform on there.
yeah, for
Okay.
therapists who we pay $29.95. Don't quote me on that, but around there. And then they have a platform when you log in that you can use
And what is it? Like 29. I'm not quoting you on it, but that's monthly. 29.95.
monthly. And yeah, and they give you the platform. They give you a little blurb that you can put in, so you can go see mine. It's on there,
Yeah.
and then you get the magazine. I think it comes up 10 times a year.
Okay. Got it. Interesting. Yeah, I thought it was just a listing platform. Um,
Yeah, no,
like
it's a listing platform. That's what I mean. You can put your little blurb.
yeah, I thought it was just a listing platform though. I didn't know that they had like the video capabilities. I thought people just used that to get discovered, and then once they got discovered, you would get contacted by the patient who wanted to see you, and then you would take it off platform. I didn't.
And obviously in the last year and a half, a bunch of places have jumped on that bandwagon of creating a teletherapy platform because of the pandemic.
Yeah.
So Psychology Today want to say August or September last year they started it, so it's
Oh,
fairly
okay.
new. Um, a lot of places have done that. I've been contacted and consulted on a few of them. And whenever I ask them about the HIPAA compliance and bandwidth and all that, they kind of, the ones that are not available are the ones who looked at me funny.
And did you like prior to them launching this conferencing capabilities, HIPAA compliant conferencing? Did you have to pay them to be on their platform prior to that as well? You
Yes, we
did.
do. The 29.95 hasn't changed, so I'll give them credit. They added a platform essentially for free. The
Mm-hmm.
29.95 was essentially your directory.
Got it. Yeah, it's interesting. It's just interesting to look at some of the different business models out there for this, because you have the direct listing platforms like them, where you list, you pay a monthly subscription, they give you exposure, and then you get to control. You get to bring them into your own private practice and control your rates that way. And then you have the ones that kind of try and own the entire transaction. So like they do the discovery where do you have a profile on Talkspace? Do you make a
Yes, I
profile and
do.
everything? So you make a profile on those and then you get discovered, but it's completely different with the payments, right? They're not paying you directly. It's more like the patient signs up for a package and then you get paid through Talkspace, a piece
Yeah,
of that.
so the patients pay whatever fee that Talkspace puts in, and based upon how often they respond to the client, how many words they use, or how many words they use while they're talking to them, then the therapist gets paid based on that.
Based on the amount of words that you use.
Correct.
Really? So like, oh, so okay. So if we have a long conversation,
Yes,
that's
there is a max. I can't get more than a certain amount.
mm,
But if let's say for example, you're going to Australia next year. Obviously we can't, but you go to Australia
yeah.
next week. You don't use the platform at all. Well, I don't get paid for that week, and I'm BetterHelp is like that. Talkspace is like that,
No,
and they do that because they feel like they got to pay for the service, so to speak.
gotcha. Yeah, you pay for however much you actually use.
Correct.
Makes sense. And what do you like more? Do you like those platforms more, or do you like kind of using the Psychology Today to use your have your listing up, pay the $29, and then kind of just drive your clients that way, or patients rather, or do you like the other option?
You know, I think of it as this Talkspace, the BetterHelp, and those platforms can be a great place for extra income for people. I don't think it's the end all, the be all. That's just an extra. I think that that's very important to think about it. I think we should all have our own platform that we do it. And, we've named two. Simple Practice has one. There's different type of Therapy Notes has one. Different types of electronic health records has them. So I think that you can do that because then you still hold the rates
Mm-hmm.
and you get to decide that. So you can do the telehealth through that. Um, to say which one I prefer, I definitely prefer that one. The biggest concern I have when we're using this type of platform is that there's not many that have group capacity. So let's say, for example, I want to do a group on anxiety during COVID. Well, it's very difficult to find a HIPAA compliant place because now you're using the bandwidth for 5, 6, 7 people. So it gets a little complicated when you're doing group. And I like to do groups, especially for something as big as the pandemic. You don't want to be doing a pandemic one-on-one because I think that could be a bigger conversation. People can support each other. So I don't think it's a great platform for group,
Mm.
but otherwise I really think that having your own platform, Psychology Today, Zoom, again, HIPAA compliant Zoom, Doxy.me, places like that is very helpful. So you can have those conversations that are protected and that you hold the rates, no one else does.
Yeah. Okay. And then, but in terms of the group piece of it, um, so do you host group sessions like a lot? And what do you use if Psychology Today and those other platforms aren't good for that? Do you use Doxy for that generally?
I usually, I haven't done a whole lot of groups. And when I
Mm.
do, I use Zoom.
Okay.
And what I do is I inform my clients that this is not HIPAA compliant. Not anymore. I do have HIPAA compliancy, but the groups that I ran were not HIPAA compliant and that they are aware of that and they're willing to sign off on it. So
Got it.
that's the only ethical way you can do it. The insurance companies probably wouldn't like it post-pandemic, but nonetheless, if that's the best way to give the best service for the clients, I'm more than willing to do that. I work with one of my favorite groups to work with are first responders, and sometimes they can't make it face to face. This again, pre-pandemic. So sometimes just making them jump on a group type of Zoom, they get the services to have a group setting for them, and I have a few people face to face. I have a few online. It really
Mhm.
works well for everyone and engages people where they're at versus come to my office. I don't care if you live in Brooklyn, come to Holliston, Massachusetts, sit your butt down. I
Yeah.
don't think that that's helpful. So sometimes using it, I've always been a therapist that thinks about what's best for the client. It's not about the therapist. The therapist does have to have boundaries. I get that. But at the same time, if you tell me that you prefer doing group, who am I to say no?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
really about the client and what they need. And I think telehealth gives you that much more choice so that you can get a therapist that meets you where your needs are.
Yeah. I think group, I think that's probably one of the most powerful things that virtual and teletherapy will be able to do. Because I think you're definitely right. And it'll be interesting to see what happens if some people start hosting group sessions themselves that are maybe like kind of unpaid where people just can get together and, you know, talk.
Well, a lot of the self-help groups for substance use, AANA, CA, Smart Recovery, they're all doing it right now through Zoom, or majority of them are.
Mhm.
And it's been fairly successful. I have a few friends in there. I have also some clients, and they say sometimes there's like 30 and 40 people, and it's been beneficial. So
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
has been happening.
That's good. All right, let's talk about the podcast. So Steve is going to start a podcast in June. And we talked about it a little bit prior to starting recording this. But Steve, if you could explain a little bit kind of about what it is generally and what you plan on covering, that would be awesome.
So I wrote a book called Finding Your Way Through Therapy. And after I read that, when the people read that book, they're like, Steve, you just made therapy much more reachable for us. It helps that this is my second language. So me and big words are not big friends.
Mm,
So a lot of people said, well, why don't you do a podcast so that people can see that therapy can be reachable for everyone and that you don't need to be intimidated by the process. So it germinated for a while and I spoke to a few people. So the goal is going to be to make therapy very reachable. So there's going to be some episodes where I'm going to be talking, but I also am going to bring in some guests. And sometimes it's going to be some guests that are not what you would expect. One of my plans long term is to bring a guest that likes actual professional wrestling. And you would ask me, why would you do that? Well, professional wrestling has the most psychology than any sport in the world because they're getting their audience to buy into stuff and then they can play with your emotions. And
mm.
how do they do that and stuff like that? So I'm looking forward to it. Seems a little unorthodox for
Yeah,
people,
but
but
that's good.
I
People
want,
will like that. Yeah.
and I think that that's what you got to buy into. And I know it's, choreographed, but those wrestlers are very good athletes. I give them a lot of credit. WrestleMania was yesterday. I couldn't do what they do.
Where
And
was
when
that?
you
Down in
think,
Florida?
yeah, they had it in Tampa
In
Bay.
Tampa, yeah.
But so I really want to make finding your way through therapy is to get people to buy into therapy, make it palpable. And I'm really hoping that people can and therapists who are going to listen to this, hopefully they'll be giving them a little more boost about how important our jobs are. And sometimes being told that we can't take it all seriously. I take all my clients seriously, obviously, but there's days where just, shooting the crap with a client and creating that connection is a lot more important than me going, okay, but you didn't tell me about your emotions about
Yeah.
wrestling yesterday. Well, no, there's no wrestling emotions. You just want to talk about wrestling. And it's okay to do that because most people will understand that creating that relationship is much more important than anything else. And I have a lot of experience with trauma, first responders. I worked in the community justice programs for many years. I was on a crisis team for 14 years. So I'm going to bring all these experiences that I've had, including individual therapy, and just make it reachable to everyone because therapy to me everyone should be in therapy, even if it's once every 6 months to every year. If
Yeah.
everything's going great, awesome, do it like a physical. And if you're having you're having a tough time, you increase the visits. And if you're not having a hard time, you do it. And I have a few clients like that. Therapy is something that my clients come in like, I didn't think I'd like therapy. And that's what I want to do, make through this podcast, make therapy very palpable.
That's awesome. Well, I'll make sure to include it's going to be called Finding Your Way Through Therapy. Is that the name?
Yes.
Okay. So when it comes out, I'll make sure to put the link, if it's on Spotify or wherever it is, in this post. And no, that's awesome. I'm looking forward. I'm going to listen to that.
Thank you. I hope you do. And if you want to ever come on, we'd love to have your point of view too, because I really want this to be not a therapist talking to another therapist and making it sound, therapy is important, but I don't want it to be snotty.
I think that's really, well, what do you mean by snotty exactly? Because you've kind of touched on that a couple times.
Because sometimes therapists will put in some words that, if I start talking about countertransference or I start talking about boundaries, and that could be a little overwhelming for people. What does that mean? And sometimes I do a lot of neuropsychology also, but if I talk about neural pathways and neuroplasticity, that can be very intimidating. And if two therapists start talking about that, we're going to go into our jargon. And that's not palpable to people. Therapists are going to go, yeah, I get it. But some people will be like, really? And he's going to talk about that in therapy? I don't want that. I want him to be able to, what the hell's neuroplasticity?
Yeah.
So that's
it's not
what I mean
for
about
the therapist. It's for the people seeking help mostly, right? So it doesn't
and I hope the therapists get a little more excited about doing therapy in a different way. And again, therapists are not snobby in the typical fashion, so please understand that. But I find that when you start having these conversations between two therapists, the technical terms seem to be getting worse, and then you don't reach the audience. And for me, reaching an audience is much more important.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. I have never done therapy, but I think that like I've read into it a decent amount. And what's the textbook like most common type of therapy? CBT? Is it?
Cognitive behavioral therapy, yes.
So
this is what is considered the most effective therapy.
And there's kind of like a playbook. Sorry, there's cars beeping outside. And there's kind of like
Brooklyn.
Yeah, it's always something. There's always people doing crap. But so there's kind of like a playbook for it, right? Like it's kind of like,
but there's a playbook.
There's some math behind
things.
it, right? Not math, but there's some structure to it. And then you're pretty much saying it's important to follow the structure, but at the same time, sometimes it's important just to loosen up and just talk to your patient and just kind of like, some days you don't need to hit every single note. You can just kind of do what they want to do, right? It's kind of what you're talking about.
Right, exactly. And I think that CBT can be helpful for mood disorders, but they're not good for schizophrenia. And if someone is actively in the substance abuse time, maybe cognitive behavioral therapy won't work, but motivational interviewing will. And sometimes it will be something like rational emotive therapy. It'll all depend on where you're going. And to me, when you do all the stats, CBT comes up a little higher, but not that much compared to psychoanalytic, behavioral, and all that. And again, I come back to the one that is above and beyond all of those is the connection with the client. So me sitting here talking to you about cognitive distortions will bore you to death if I don't explain them properly.
Yeah.
And I think that that's what I tell people. So maybe cognitive distortions has nothing to do with the person wanting to talk about, hey, why are you feeling that way? And that's part of some of the work. They call it, I believe that's part of rational emotive therapy. But instead of me going, okay, what is the first step? No, just run with the flow, because even though I'm a CBT specialist, I got my degree at Assumption College and specialized in CBT. I do psychoanalytic, I do behavioral. I am eye movement desensitization and reprocessing trained, which is for trauma. I do motivational interviewing. I work with substance abuse for many, many years, still do. So I think that when you meet the client where they're at, you have a lot more success than me saying, no, you need this.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the other really interesting thing is kind of with the internet and podcasts and YouTube and all this stuff. I think the internet is a cause of a lot of the problems that we're seeing right now with social media and stuff. And, I've heard some crazy stats about kids under the age of 15 and their anxiety and depression levels. So I think the internet has kind of caused that, but I also think it's really our only way to solve it too, is using it for good. So being able to connect with somebody over Zoom and all these different platforms, one. Two is just content, YouTube, podcasting, all this stuff. Because if somebody who never could afford, because therapy can be expensive, who never could afford going to therapy, but they could listen to your podcast, and just by hearing your voice, it calms them down, and allows them to like kind of take a step back and relax. That's a lot,
And
so
I think that it's not the tool that's the problem, it's how you use the tool. And if you're going to use the internet, you can use it for good or for not so good.
yeah,
I used to have a nonprofit that I actually went in Brooklyn and talked to a couple of schools there and talked about it. Social media itself is not evil. It's what you do with it that can be evil. And it's learning to use these tools that we have in a more positive way. And I'm not Mr. Positive by any stretch of the imagination, but using them in a better way would be very helpful. And I tell people, if you don't like the word positive, realistic. I'm fine with realistic. You're okay with realistic. Social media can be the greatest thing in the world for people to feel better, or it could be the thing that breaks you down. And unfortunately, we know the consequences of the worst part of the internet.
yeah. I think the issue is, and we'll wrap up here in a second, but I think the main issue is, unfortunately, it depends what you like, or what you kind of like to click on. Some people like to click on negative things. Some people like to click on positive things. And unfortunately, the algorithms reinforce what you like to click on. So it'll either, like you said, it's kind of like a catalyst to what you are already trending towards. So if you're kind of trending towards something, negative, it'll reinforce that really bad. If you're trending towards something positive, it'll reinforce that, which is really good. So it's, yeah, it's good and bad, but it's very powerful. So it's, yeah.
I have a teenage girl and I have a younger daughter, and I love that I taught them critical thinking. So whatever is shown to you, positive or negative, be able to look at to the other side. And I think that's the other way we can use these tools. I know we're going to have some tendencies, but be critical of anything you read. Even if it matches what you believe, be critical of it. I don't like it so much now that my daughter's a teenager, but overall, I think it's been very beneficial because they're not just taking what is said and saying that is true. Or they'll ask me, or they'll
Yeah.
look up. And I think that that's the important part. You're right, the algorithm skews it, but that algorithm can be completely destroyed if you start going, be critical of what you find, and then go search for something that may be opposite.
Yeah.
And I think that that's part of the good stuff that you can do in therapy is that I don't live I don't live at negative. I don't live in positive. I live in the middle. And, that's where I want people to be. And that's where I think, you know, we need to learn how to do, because you're right, the algorithm can be really skewed, but if
Yeah.
you learn critical thinking, that algorithm will be completely off.
Yeah. If you can separate yourself from kind of just getting sucked into that loop, and just take a step back, yeah, that'll make all the difference. Very cool. Steve, thank you. How can people find you? Do you know what your Instagram handle is?
Yes, it is my name, Steve Bisson, Steve, B as in boy, ISSON, LMHC. And
Awesome.
that's my Instagram. I'm on Facebook. My business page is like that. My YouTube is the same. Pretty much all my tools. And then if you go to my website, which is stevebissonlmhc.com, you can click on them. You got a bunch of stuff. My podcast has a placeholder right now, so you can see what the logo looks like. And a trailer will be coming out probably in the next couple of weeks to explain a little bit of what I'm going to do. And looking forward to doing it in English. And because my first language is French, I'm actually going to do one in French at least every couple of weeks, if not every couple of months, so that I can reach out to my roots in Canada.
Absolutely. Very cool. All right. Well, I'll make sure to include all that in this, and in the post, because I'll do a little story on you as well. But otherwise, thank you for coming on, Steve, and we appreciate it. And thank you for what you're doing. And it
Thank
was
you for having me. I really, truly appreciate it. This is great. I appreciate the platform. Thank you.
absolutely, it was a pleasure. So we'll talk soon. Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Yep. All right. Bye bye.
Bye.